This video is brought to you by BitMerge. In this video, we're going to be talking about the best recording settings for OBS. For those of you who don't know what OBS is a free open source software for video recording and live streaming. If you want to download OBS, there'll be a link in the description. So to start out, let's open up the settings menu. And on the general tab, I like to enable notification area icon and minimize to notification area. And what that does is instead of minimizing OBS to the taskbar, it just minimizes OBS to the system tray. I just think that's a little bit less distracting, but that's completely up to you. And then make sure after you do that, you just click apply. Now on the encoding tab, for the encoder, we're going to use the H.264 or X.264 encoder. We're not going to use the constant bitrate. Depending on what you're recording, so if you're recording something where there's not a lot of movement, you can set a higher quality balance like 9 or 10. So for something like a desktop recording where there's really not a lot of movement, 9 or 10 is perfect. But if you're going to be recording something like an FPS or something else where there's a lot of scene changes, you're going to notice a lot of pixelation when you're moving. So just set this to something lower like 5, 6, or 7. That's something you have to experiment with. A higher quality balance will give you a higher quality, but when there's more movement, it'll be a bit more pixelated. So just mess around with this a little bit. In most cases, though, 8, 9, or 10 will be fine. But again, just experiment with it. The max bitrate we're going to set to 1000, and I'll explain that in 1 second. We're going to use a custom buffer size, and we're going to use a buffer size of 0. And what this does is it actually disables the buffer system altogether, which allows our bitrate to dynamically adapt to our balance. So I'll explain that a little bit more to our quality. I'll explain that a little bit more in the advanced section, but for now, a max bitrate of 1000 and a custom buffer size of 0 will do perfectly. For the codec, I recommend the AAC codec. It's a lot more stable than the MP3 codec, and it's a lot more supported. The format, 48 kHz is perfectly fine. If you have a bit of a lower end microphone, you might want to try switching down to 44.1 kHz, but 48 kHz is almost always fine. For the bitrate, 96 is almost always fine too. If your microphone supports a higher bitrate, like 128, then I strongly recommend switching up to that, but just check with your microphone to see. So in most cases, 96 will be fine, but you can try 128, and if you don't notice any problems, then you should be good. Then the channel will be stereo. Then we can click apply and move to broadcasting settings. Now here, we're going to select the file output only mode, and the file path is going to be where we want to export our recording to. So here you can select whatever folder you want or wherever you want, and you can click OK. Now, whatever your naming scheme, if you hover over this, you'll notice they have some character sequences that you can use. So here I just do $month, $day, $M, $D, $Y, and that just replaces it with month, day, year, like this. You can do whatever you want, but whatever you do, just make sure you end it with a .mp4 extension. Now you can click apply, and we'll go to the video section. Here, if you have an onboard video adapter, or if you have a graphics card, you can select it here. The base resolution is going to be custom, and this is going to be the resolution of your monitor. Or if you're if you're playing a windowed game, for example, then it would be the resolution of your game. So I have a 1080p monitor, so I record at 1080p. If you have something like a 1536 by 864 monitor, then go ahead and just put that in here, and you're going to want to downscale it to 720p. If you want to record at 720p but you have a 1080 monitor, set your base resolution to 1080p and just downscale to 720p here with a filter that's a bicubic sharpener. So if you use the downscale at all to downscale your video, just make sure to add a bicubic sharpener. Or if you want, you can add a Lanczos sharpener. The FPS is going to be the FPS that you want to record at. So right now YouTube supports 60 FPS, so we record at 60 FPS. If you want to record at something higher, then just put it in here, but we're going to have to change one setting in the advanced section. And finally, just leave disable Aereo unchecked. Aereo is basically how Windows handles the appearance, like transparency and stuff like that. And if you do disable it, you're going to notice it's not as nice looking. Of course you can disable it, but I would recommend leaving it unchecked. Now we can apply and move on to the audio section. For the desktop audio device, this is going to be the computer sounds, so you can set this to default. The microphone is going to be the microphone you want to record with, so you can select whatever microphone you want to record with here, and then click reinitialize. Now if you notice some problems where you're only hearing the microphone in one speaker or one side of your earphones, then one side of your headset, then you want to just force it to a mono track. So if you have that problem, then you can force it to mono. If you don't, I would still recommend forcing it to a mono track, unless you have it on stereo for some other recording reasons. But make sure you leave it, even if you're going to force it to mono, make sure you leave it on stereo here. Now, if you're noticing some audio video sync issues, just set the mic off. Make sure the mic offset is set to 0 here. That could be one problem. For the hotkeys, that's completely up to you, however you want to set these. Just click on one and press the key that you want to use for the hotkey. So I recommend a recording hotkey. I just use F9, but you can use whatever you want. Just make sure it doesn't conflict with Windows hotkeys. Now in the advanced section, also make sure to click apply afterward. In the advanced section, if you have a multi-core processor, make sure you use multi-threaded optimizations. That'll allow OBS to access every one of your cores. But if you don't have a multi-core processor, then just uncheck this. The process priority class is how you want OBS to be prioritized in Windows. If you notice that OBS is having some troubles encoding videos, then I would recommend setting this to above normal. If you notice that OBS doesn't have any problems encoding videos, then just set this to normal. And if you have a faster CPU and you notice OBS isn't having any problems, just set this to idle. If that was a little bit confusing, I would recommend just leaving it on normal. In most cases, that's fine. The scene buffering time we're going to leave at 700. If you change this, you may notice some audio video sync issues. Now the CPU preset, this is basically how you want to locate your CPU towards quality. So if you set this to slower, it's going to use more of your CPU, but the quality is going to be significantly better than ultra fast, for example. So it really depends on what you're recording. So if you're recording desktop, then you're not going to want to use a lot of CPU, and you don't really need to use a lot of CPU, and the quality will still be fine. So I recommend just leaving this on ultra fast. But if you're going to record, and make sure to press yes, if you're going to record something like an FPS or MMO or whatever else you're recording, something where there's something that takes up a lot of resources, or something that you want to have higher quality, then I would recommend setting this to either very fast, faster, or fast. That's one thing you have to experiment a little bit with. If you notice some lag in game or during your recording, then just bump this up to something like, so let's say you're recording on fast, just bump this up to faster. You're recording on faster, bump it up to very fast. It's just one of those things you have to play around with to see what the fastest speed is with the best quality. Now the encoding profile you can leave on high. We're going to use a constant frame rate, and what that does is that locks our frame rate in at whatever we set in the video section. So here you can see this frame rate is locked in at 60 FPS, and that's just because programs like Premiere Pro or Final Cut Pro or really other industry standard programs don't really accept variable frame rates. And there's good reasoning behind that, but if you do want to record with a variable frame rate, then you can just leave this unchecked. But in most cases, you're going to want to leave this checked. Now here, we're going to use a custom encoder setting, and we're going to set a constant rate factor, CRF, of, and this really depends on your recording again. So going back to the encoding section, here where we set our buffer size to 0, what that does is that's going to allow our bit rate to adapt to what the rate factor we set here. So the rate factor is sort of like the CPU, like the CPU preset, and that's determining what you want your quality to be. So and how you want your video to be compressed during encoding. So constant rate factor of 0, for example, is lossless compression, meaning during the encoding process your video isn't compressed at all. And that's going to take up a lot of space. It's going to use a lot of your CPU power, but the quality is going to be very good. So if you're doing something like desktop recordings, then and you have the CPU power to spare, then I would recommend setting it to as close to lossless as you can get. So one more thing to recommend is don't set this to 0, because that's lossless recording, and OBS and the H.264 encoder have some problems with that. So if you want to record at very high quality, set this to something like 1, 2, or 3. But you may notice that it's going to use a lot more of your CPU, and the file size is going to be a bit larger. So normally I recommend starting out at something like 15, a quality of 15, and then if that's good quality to you, then you can leave it at 15. If you want higher quality, then move it to something like 10, and just go from there. See how much space it uses up, and see how much of your CPU it uses up, and find the best preset for you. So that's one more thing you have to experiment with, and I'm sorry that you have to experiment with it, but it's going to result in the best recording if you do experiment with it. I also recommend encoding in full range. If you don't encode in full range, you might notice that you have some color alterations in your video. or the colors aren't exactly correct in your recording to the actual thing you're recording. Now in the video section, if you set an FPS higher than 60 FPS, here you're just going to have to allow 61 to 120 FPS entries. Now another thing to solve audio video sync issues is forcing the encoder to make timestamps. So here you can force the encoder to use audio video timestamps. And what that does is that'll synchronize your video and audio according to those timestamps. So you can try this setting out if you're having some audio video sync issues. This might solve it. Enabling a constant frame rate will most likely solve it. Making sure this is 700 may also solve it, and in the audio section, making sure this is set to 0 will also solve audio video sync issues. Most likely solve. If you have any other problems with audio video, just go ahead and leave a comment below and we'll try and troubleshoot that. Now that's pretty much it for the settings. Make sure you click apply, and you can click OK. Apply, OK. Now there's just two more things I want to show you. So if you're doing desktop recordings, or game recordings, or other recordings, in most cases you're going to want to do a game capture, even if you're doing desktop recording. And then from there, if you want to do a desktop recording, just do a game capture and then a monitor capture. And the reason for that is if you just do a monitor capture like this, and select a subregion, I know it's really tempting because you can use the subregion here, but that causes a lot of problems with Windows Aereo, and you might notice that your recording is a bit more choppy. So you can try out a monitor capture if you're doing desktop recordings and you want to have a subregion, but if you don't need a subregion, then I would recommend doing a game capture. And here, that's what I'm doing, that's what I'm recording with right now. And then you can capture your mouse cursor if you want. If you're recording a game, Steam, for example, has an anti-cheat hook, so you want OBS to be able to hook into that anti-cheat. That's not really always necessary, but that's just an option you can enable. And then alpha blending will just help blend your whites together if you enable that too. Now the final thing is, if you already use OBS, you may notice that something's different, and that's that there's no preview here. And that's because I don't think it's something that's really necessary if you're not live streaming. If you're recording, I think you can really see what you're recording. So I just tend to right click, preview, and uncheck enable view. And it's just resources that don't need to be used, and if you can disable it, then go for it. If you do want that preview though, then you can just leave it on by preview, enable view. That's completely up to you, but if you want to save a little bit of your resources and it's something you don't need, then you can disable it. That's pretty much it for this video. I hope you enjoyed the video, I hope it was helpful. If you had any questions or concerns, you can leave them in the comment section. And we'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.